Hello, and welcome to Lila's Lullabies, where we spend time exploring with Lyla, a traveler who wanders the world at her own pace while sharing her most enriching and restorative moments with you. In tonight's story, we'll follow Lyla as she explores the historic American city of Philadelphia. There's nowhere you need to be, nothing you need to remember. Just settle in, get comfortable, and let yourself go. We're so glad you're here. Whenever you're ready, let's begin. The train pulled into Philadelphia's 30th Street station just after 9 in the morning, gliding to a smooth stop beneath the station's soaring Beaux-Arts ceiling. Lyla gathered her bag and joined the flow of passengers making their way through the grand concourse, their footsteps echoing off the marble floors and stone columns. The May morning light streamed through the tall windows, illuminating the space in a way that made even a train station feel monumental. Outside, the city was bright and warm, the kind of perfect spring day that felt like a gift. Trees lining the streets were fully leafed out in fresh green, and the air had a softness to it that made her grateful she'd worn light layers. Philadelphia in May was apparently ideal, warm enough to be comfortable, but not yet oppressive with the humidity she knew would arrive in summer. Lyla oriented herself with the map on her phone and began walking toward the historic district. The walk would take about 30 minutes, but she was in no hurry, content to let the city reveal itself gradually. She crossed the Schuylkill River on the Market Street Bridge, pausing midway to look upstream at the river's tree-lined banks and the distinctive boathouses that served the city's rowing clubs. The neighborhoods shifted as she walked, from the university area near the station to the increasingly urban landscape of Center City, with its mix of modern office towers and older buildings that spoke to Philadelphia's long history. She passed City Hall, an enormous Second Empire building with a tower topped by a statue of William Penn, the city's founder. The building dominated the intersection, and Lyla paused to admire its ornate facade, the intricate stonework and sculptures that covered nearly every surface. Continuing east, the streets began to narrow, and the buildings grew older, their red brick facades and white-trimmed windows creating a rhythm of Federal-era architecture. She was entering Old City, the neighborhood that had been at the heart of colonial Philadelphia, where the nation's founding documents had been debated and signed. Independence National Historical Park announced itself with green spaces and colonial-era buildings preserved and protected. Lyla found herself on a brick-paved pedestrian mall, surrounded by structures she'd seen in history books. Low brick buildings with white steeples, gardens enclosed by wrought iron fences, markers indicating historic significance at every turn. She started at the visitor center to get her bearings and secure a timed entry ticket for Independence Hall. A park ranger was giving an orientation talk to a group of visitors, explaining the layout of the park and the significance of the various buildings. Lyla listened for a few minutes, appreciating the ranger's enthusiasm and knowledge, then set out to explore on her own. The Liberty Bell Center was her first stop, housed in a modern glass building that allowed views of Independence Hall behind it. The approach to the bell was designed as a kind of journey, with exhibits explaining the bell's history, its role as a symbol of freedom, and the complex legacy of that symbolism in a nation that had permitted slavery even as it proclaimed liberty. The bell itself sat in the main hall, suspended in its frame, the famous crack clearly visible running up from the lip. It was smaller than Lyla had expected. Bells in photographs always seemed larger somehow, but there was something powerful about seeing it in person, this physical object that had become so laden with symbolic meaning. Other visitors crowded around, taking photos, reading the inscribed biblical passage about proclaiming liberty, discussing the crack and its various origin stories. Lyla took her time, circling the bell, considering its history and the weight of expectation placed on an object that was, after all, just a bell, albeit one with an impressive crack and an even more impressive story. From the Liberty Bell, she walked across the green to Independence Hall, arriving just in time for her scheduled tour. The building was elegant and restrained, its Georgian architecture speaking to colonial prosperity and aspiration. Red brick, white trim, a simple bell tower rising from the center. Nothing ostentatious, but everything well-proportioned and dignified. The tour guide gathered their group in the assembly room, where both the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution had been debated and signed. The room was furnished with period pieces, simple chairs around tables covered in green felt, a raised chair at the front for the presiding officer, tall windows letting in natural light. The guide spoke about the debates that had taken place here, the compromises and arguments, the sweltering summer heat during the Constitutional Convention when the windows were kept closed to ensure secrecy. She pointed out George Washington's chair with its distinctive sun carved into the back. Was it a rising or setting sun? Benjamin Franklin had wondered, unsure during the convention's darkest moments whether the new nation would succeed or fail. Lyla found herself moved by the ordinariness of the space. This wasn't a temple or palace, just a room where people had gathered to argue and debate and ultimately create something new. The simplicity made it more powerful somehow, this reminder that history was made by people in rooms, having difficult conversations and making hard choices. After Independence Hall, Lyla wandered through the surrounding streets, discovering small museums and historic houses tucked between the more famous sites. She found Franklin Court, where Benjamin Franklin's house had once stood, now marked by a ghost structure, a steel frame indicating the building's outline and suggesting its former presence without attempting to recreate it. The area was busy with school groups and tourists, but there were also locals cutting through on their way to work, joggers using the brick sidewalks for their morning runs, people walking dogs or grabbing coffee from the food trucks parked near the visitor areas. The historical district wasn't frozen in amber, but remained part of a living city, and Lyla appreciated this mixing of past and present. She grabbed a soft pretzel from a street vendor, went in Philadelphia after all, and found a bench in a small square to eat it. The pretzel was still warm, properly salty, with that distinctive chew that proper soft pretzels had. She ate it slowly, watching people pass by, enjoying the May sunshine and the sense of being in a place where significant things had happened. By late morning, Lyla was ready to head toward what she expected would be the highlight of the trip and the main reason for her visit, the Philadelphia Museum of Art. She caught a bus that would take her up the Benjamin Franklin Parkway, the grand boulevard that connected City Hall to the museum. The ride gave her a different perspective on the city. She passed Logan Square with its Swan Memorial Fountain, saw the parkway's flags from dozens of nations fluttering in the breeze, caught glimpses of the Barnes Foundation and the Rodin Museum, both institutions she'd visit if she had more time. The bus dropped her at the base of the museum, and Lyla stood looking up at the long flight of stairs leading to the entrance. These were, of course, the famous Rocky Steps, made iconic by the training montage in the 1976 film. Even now, decades later, people were running up the steps with their arms raised in victory, recreating Sylvester Stallone's fictional triumph. Lyla couldn't help but smile. There was something wonderfully unpretentious about it. A major art museum forever associated with a boxing movie, and the museum leaning into it rather than resisting, even placing a Rocky statue nearby for photo opportunities. She'd seen serious art museums in other cities that she guessed would never acknowledge such pop culture connections, but Philadelphia seemed to embrace the dual identity. She climbed the steps at a more moderate pace than the Rocky enthusiasts, pausing partway up to catch her breath and take in the view. From here, the Benjamin Franklin Parkway stretched out below, a green corridor leading back towards City Hall, the fountain in Logan Square visible in the middle distance. The city spread out beyond, a mix of neighborhoods and parks, church steeples and modern towers. At the top, slightly winded but satisfied, Lyla entered the museum's grand entrance hall. The interior was spectacular. High ceilings, classical columns, polished floors that reflected the light streaming through tall windows. The scale was impressive without being overwhelming, grand but inviting. She bought her ticket and picked up a museum map, deciding to start with the European galleries before exploring the rest of the collection. The Philadelphia Museum of Art had a reputation for being encyclopedic, with strong collections spanning centuries and continents, and Lyla wanted to see as much as she could in the time she had. The medieval galleries came first, and she walked through rooms displaying illuminated manuscripts, carved altarpieces, stained glass removed from European churches and reassembled here. There was something both wonderful and melancholy about seeing these objects removed from their original contexts, preserved and protected, but also displaced. The Renaissance galleries were rich with paintings and sculptures, works by artists whose names were familiar even to casual museum visitors. She stood before a Botticelli, admiring the flowing lines and delicate colors, the way the artist had captured both physical beauty and something more ephemeral. Grace, perhaps, or the idea of grace. Moving through the galleries was like moving through time, each room representing a different era, a different vision of what art could be and do. The Baroque galleries were dramatic and dynamic, all swirling movement and rich colors. The Dutch Golden Age rooms were quieter, more intimate, filled with domestic scenes and portraits that captured everyday life with remarkable attention to detail. Lyla spent a long time in front of a Vermeer, one of only about 35 paintings by the artist known to exist. The painting showed a simple domestic scene, a woman reading a letter by a window, but the quality of light was extraordinary, creating a sense of stillness and contemplation that made the moment feel eternal rather than momentary. She moved on to the Impressionist galleries, where the light and color seemed to vibrate on the canvases. A Monet water lily painting drew her in, the surface of the painting dissolving into pure color and light when viewed up close, then resolving into a recognizable scene when she stepped back. She'd seen Monet's work before, of course, but each encounter felt fresh, the paintings revealing new aspects with each viewing. The museum had an excellent collection of Cézanne's work, and Lyla found herself particularly drawn to his still lifes. Arrangements of apples and oranges that somehow became studies in form and color, the familiar objects transformed into something almost abstract while remaining recognizably themselves. Time passed in that particular way it does in museums, where you lose track of hours while gaining a sense of timelessness. Lyla wandered through the modern and contemporary galleries, encountering Picasso and Matisse, Duchamp and Pollock, artists who had pushed against conventions and expanded definitions of what art could be. She found the museum's period rooms fascinating. Entire rooms removed from European and American houses and reconstructed here, complete with original furniture, woodwork, and decorations. A Japanese tea house, a medieval cloister, a Frank Lloyd Wright interior, each one creating an immersive environment that was more than just a display of objects. After several hours of wandering, Lyla found herself in the museum's cafeteria, ready for a break. She bought a coffee and claimed a table near the windows overlooking the Schuylkill River. The view was peaceful, the river flowing below, boathouses along its banks, trees in full spring leaf creating a green corridor through the urban landscape. She drank slowly, letting her mind rest after the visual intensity of the galleries. Other museum visitors sat around her, some consulting their maps and planning their next galleries, others looking as pleasantly exhausted as she felt. There was a particular kind of tiredness that came from museum visiting, not physical exhaustion so much as a saturation, a feeling of having absorbed as much beauty and meaning as one could hold for the moment. After her break, Lyla explored a few more galleries, the Arms and Armor Collection, the Asian Art Wing, a special exhibition of contemporary photography, before finally deciding she'd had enough. It was late afternoon, and she was ready to return to street level and the ordinary world outside the museum. She exited back down the famous steps, walking this time, no rocky impression required, and made her way towards South Philadelphia. She'd read about the Italian market, and more specifically about the neighborhood's authentic Italian restaurants. She had saved her appetite for this part of the trip and was sure it would not disappoint. The walk south took her through changing neighborhoods, past the genteel Victorian houses of Rittenhouse Square, which she detoured through, finding a small park with mature trees and a sense of being a neighborhood living room where residents sat on benches reading or chatting and dog walkers congregated near the fountain. She continued south through more residential areas, the houses becoming more tightly packed, the streets narrower and more European in feel. And then she was in South Philly, where the Italian character of the neighborhood was immediately apparent. Shops with signs in Italian, restaurants advertising authentic regional specialties, religious statues in front yards, Italian flags hanging from porches. She found a restaurant on a corner, its exterior modest, but its interior visible through large windows, showing white tablecloths and walls covered with photographs of what were presumably family members spanning several generations. The menu in the window featured dishes Lyla recognized from her travels in Italy, real Italian food, not the Americanized versions served in many restaurants. Inside, the atmosphere was warm and slightly chaotic in the best way. Family groups occupied several tables, multiple generations sharing meals and conversation. The staff moved efficiently through the space, somehow managing to convey both professionalism and familial warmth. Lyla was seated at a small table near the window, and a server, a woman in her 40s with dark hair pulled back, appeared with a menu and a basket of bread. "First time here?" she asked, her accent placing her as local rather than Italian-born, but with a distinctive Philadelphia sound. "It is," Lyla confirmed. "Okay, so everything's made fresh. The specials are on the board." She gestured toward a chalkboard on the wall. "And they're all good, but the braciole today is particularly excellent. My mother's recipe. Can I start you with something to drink?" Lyla ordered a glass of red wine and studied the menu. Everything looked appealing. Handmade pasta, traditional sauces, meat dishes, prepared in ways that spoke to generations of Italian cooking tradition. She decided on the braciole, thin beef rolls stuffed with breadcrumbs, cheese, and herbs, braised in tomato sauce, and a side of broccoli rabe. The food, when it arrived, was exceptional. The braciole was tender and flavorful, the stuffing perfectly seasoned, the sauce rich but not heavy. The broccoli rabe was properly bitter and garlicky, the perfect counterpoint to the richness of the meat. Lyla ate slowly, savoring each bite, occasionally tearing off a piece of bread to soak up the sauce. Around her, the restaurant hummed with conversation, families catching up, couples on dates, friends sharing meals and stories. There was something deeply satisfying about eating well-prepared food in a place where cooking was clearly taken seriously, where recipes were passed down and traditions maintained. After dinner, Lyla sat with an espresso, feeling contentedly full and relaxed. The server had asked if she wanted dessert, but Lyla had declined. The meal had been perfect as it was, and she didn't want to risk spoiling the balance. As she finished her coffee, she pulled out her phone to check the time and saw a notification about a baseball game that evening. The Philadelphia Phillies were playing at Citizens Bank Park, and tickets were still available. Lyla hesitated. She wasn't particularly a baseball fan. She'd watched games occasionally, but had never really understood it. But she was here, and it was a beautiful May evening, and it seems like the perfect way to round out her Philly experience. She paid the bill, thanked the server, and made her way to the subway station. The ride to the stadium was quick, the train filling with fans wearing Phillies gear, red jerseys and caps, foam fingers, face paint on some of the younger attendees. The energy was enthusiastic without being aggressive, families and groups of friends all heading toward the same destination. At the stadium, Lyla bought a ticket in the upper deck, the cheapest option available, and made her way through the concourses. The stadium was modern and clean, with all the amenities of contemporary sports venues: food stands, merchandise shops, video screens showing highlights and statistics. She climbed to her section, the numbers increasing as she went higher and higher. The upper deck was steep, and by the time she found her row, she was genuinely high above the field. But the view was spectacular. She could see the entire playing field spread out below, the diamond perfect and geometric, the grass impossibly green under the stadium lights. She found her seat, a plastic chair bolted to the concrete, no frills but functional, and settled in. The seats around her were filling with fans, most of them clearly regulars who knew each other, who greeted each other by name and picked up conversations from previous games. The couple to her right were probably in their 60s, wearing matching Phillies shirts and keeping score in paper programs with careful pencil marks. The family to her left had 3 children ranging from maybe 6 to 12, all of them excited and already negotiating for stadium food. The game began with the national anthem, everyone standing, the crowd singing along with varying degrees of pitch accuracy. Then the first pitch, and the game was underway. Lyla found herself surprisingly engaged, despite her limited understanding of baseball's finer points. There was something hypnotic about the rhythm of it. The pitcher's wind-up, the crack of the bat, the ball arcing through the air, fielders moving into position. Between pitches there were pauses, moments when the tension built or dissipated, when fans could talk among themselves or get up to buy food. The couple next to her were generous with their explanations when they noticed her uncertainty. 2 outs, runner on second, the man said during one at-bat, pointing to help her understand the situation. If he gets a hit here, we tie it up. The batter did get a hit, and the runner scored, and the crowd erupted in cheers. Lyla found herself cheering too, caught up in the collective excitement. The energy was infectious. As the game progressed through its innings, Lyla began to understand the appeal. It wasn't about constant action. In fact, much of the game was waiting, watching, anticipating. But that waiting created space for other things: conversation, observation, the simple pleasure of being outside on a beautiful evening with thousands of other people. The sun set behind the stadium, the sky turning shades of pink and orange before fading to deep blue. The lights became more prominent, illuminating the field in bright white light, while the crowd sat in relative darkness, creating a sense of theater, of a performance being watched by thousands. By the 7th inning stretch, when everyone stood to sing "Take Me Out to the Ball Game," Lyla was fully immersed in the experience. She sang along, badly, and didn't care. The family next to her was singing too, the parents helping the youngest child with the words. The Phillies won in the 9th inning with a home run that sent the crowd into ecstatic celebration. Fans were on their feet, high-fiving strangers, hugging friends and family. The couple keeping score carefully noted the final play, then smiled at each other with satisfaction. As the crowd began to file out, Lyla stayed in her seat a bit longer, watching the field below as the players celebrated and the grounds crew began preparing for the stadium's closure. The crowd's exit was slow and good-natured, thousands of people moving together but no one rushing, everyone still riding the high of the victory. She thought about the day, the morning's historical sights and the weight of founding documents, the climb up the museum steps and the hours spent with masterworks of European painting, the authentic Italian meal in South Philly, and now this, an evening at a baseball game she hadn't planned to attend. There was something perfect about the trajectory, from the serious contemplation of history and art to the simple communal pleasure of watching a game with strangers who became temporary companions. Each part had enriched the other somehow, creating a day that felt full and varied, and unexpectedly wonderful. The stadium was emptying out now, but Lyla remained in her seat high in the upper deck a few minutes more. Below, the field lights still blazed, illuminating the now empty diamond. The crack of bats and the roar of the crowd had faded, replaced by the quieter sounds of a stadium winding down. Distant voices, the hum of machinery, the occasional announcement over the PA system. She looked around at the other stragglers who, like her, seemed reluctant to leave, a few couples lingering in their seats, some solo attendees gazing at the field, a small group of friends still chatting and laughing. The May evening had grown cool but remained pleasant, and there was no urgency to be anywhere else. From her high vantage point, Lyla could see beyond the stadium to the Philadelphia skyline in the distance, the city's lights twinkling against the darkening sky. She thought about all the layers of the city she'd experienced today, the colonial history of Independence Hall, the artistic treasures of the museum, the immigrant neighborhoods that had shaped South Philadelphia's character, and this very modern cathedral of sports where people gathered in community. A sense of contentment settled over her, the kind of peace that comes from a day well spent, from new experiences embraced, from the unexpected delights of spontaneous decisions. She hadn't planned to attend a baseball game, hadn't expected to feel anything in particular about it, but here she was, feeling grateful for the impulse that brought her to this seat. High above the field, surrounded by the lingering energy of thousands of fans who'd shared something together. The stadium workers were moving through the sections now, beginning the cleanup, and Lyla knew it was time to go. But she allowed herself one more moment. Looking out at the empty field, the perfect grass, the bases waiting for tomorrow's game, the whole space holding the memory of tonight's play and preparing for whatever came next. She stood slowly, gathering her things, and made her way down the steep steps toward the exit, joining the final trickle of fans heading home. As she descended toward street level, she carried that sense of pleasant surprise with her, a reminder that sometimes the unplanned moments were the ones worth savoring most.